Hello YouTube, it is IconRailFan76, and today I would like to discuss a video that was uploaded at the time of recording this 4 hours ago. So, on YouTube, there's this railfanning channel known as the Winnipeg Railfan. You may or may not have heard of him, but in short, he is a Canadian railfanner who is also a good friend of mine. I have known him for quite a while. He recently put out a video where he attempts to fix the iconography and the branding for Canadian Pacific Kansas City, or CPKC. For those of you who have been living under a rock, CPKC is the result of a merger between Canadian Pacific and Kansas City Southern, though in retrospect it is quite obvious that it is more of an acquisition, if anything. In this video, the Winnipeg Railfan describes his personal gripes with the paint scheme itself, and he also, as I mentioned earlier, attempts to redesign it to make it more into a recognizable brand and with better iconography. Now, given his channel branding, it has some regional bias towards it, which is understandable as someone who grew up with their own hometown railroad. Of course, I'm going to be biased towards the Kansas City Southern in the Midwest and Southern regions. There was one issue that was brought to light as a result of watching this video, and it's not meant to be a jab at the Winnipeg Railfan himself, and that being the whole iconography and branding of CPKC itself. Now, starting off, we have to talk about the elephant in the room, that being the brand new paint scheme. It is very controversial in the railroading community, and many have drawn their own interpretations of what it should have been, what it could have been, etc., etc. Of course, how the paint scheme came to be, and it is described in the video, it was put up to an employee vote. However, it is joked that perhaps they were being held at gunpoint to select the number one option for cost effectiveness. My personal theory is that it was chosen by the employees to spite Canadian National, hence its similarities. However, with no evidence for either theory, it is just that, a crackpot theory. My opinions on the paint scheme can be seen as rather polarizing or controversial, but honestly, I do not think it's too bad of a paint scheme. It happens to fit into our world of simplistic design, and it also is straight, effective, and to the point, with the tricolor design, utilizing at least one color from both preceding railroads. In fact, it's kind of funny because the main color used by both railroads happened to be red. However, that simplicity is also to its detriment, as that's the problem I take with the paint scheme itself. It's nothing too bad, but it's nothing really special either. It doesn't stand out. It's simplistic to a bad degree. And many graphic designers will tell you that simplicity is not always the better option. Many have joked that the paint scheme is just knockoff AWVR. However, given the fact that AWVR itself is based on CSX's YN2 and Santa Fe's War Bonnet, and given the fact that Canadian Pacific locomotives were used for the filming of Unstoppable, I honestly can't complain about it too much, and red, black, and yellow are a tricolor choice that does go hard. Of course, we can't talk about the paint scheme without talking about the logo embroidered onto said paint scheme. And this is where another huge point of contention comes up in the video itself. Winnipeg Railfan points out how it's basically just Canadian Pacific 2, and how it has almost no change from what once was. And it's only briefly mentioned, but this is actually one of the biggest problems I take with the Canadian Pacific Kansas City merger. And that would be how there's little to no respect being given to Kansas City Southern except a brief mention in the logo itself. It basically boils down to the fact that Canadian Pacific is not masking the fact that, haha, we're taking over your railroad and there's all you can do about it. And when you look at the bigger picture, all it becomes is just an erasure of the Kansas City Southern and basically everything it had built up. Kansas City Southern is a railroad that is, even before the merger, was heavily overlooked. No one really batted an eye at it except a very small group. It's not as big. In fact, it is the smallest Class 1 railroad out of the comparative Big Four: Norfolk Southern, Union Pacific, CSX, and BNSF. But that still doesn't mean it didn't have its own unique history. Nor does that mean it did not have an impact on the railroad industry as a whole. If the merger had been stylized as an acquisition with no rebrand, then it would be fine. It would still suck, but it would be fine because we all know what an acquisition is. It happened all the time back in the day, and that's why we have the Big Four. But as you and I both know, that is clearly not the case, and Canadian Pacific has gone all in with the full rebranding. Which makes sense, given it's the only north-south transcon main line that connects the United States, Canada, and Mexico contiguously. So you would think that there's limitless potential for said rebrand. And what does Canadian Pacific do with this rebrand? Nothing. It's just Canadian Pacific 2. Right down to the logo. There is no respect shown for Kansas City Southern in its heritage and history, except a brief subletter in the logo itself. That's it. We just keep the founding year of Canadian Pacific, we keep the beaver, we keep a majority of the red. Not even Retro Bell, which was brought back to pay homage to the Kansas City Southern heritage, even gets a shout out. It's just Canadian Pacific 2. And this was really the only issue I took with the video. Like I said, it's briefly glossed over and it is played for comedics. And the regional bias doesn't exactly play well into that either. In the video, it panders more towards the Canadian sector of the merger, with the suggestion to either bring back CP Rail Systems or the Multimark logo. But again, there's little to no thought given to Kansas City Southern, which, as a historian, makes me sad. It's a railroad, again, that is highly overlooked even today, even back then, and now that it is gone forever, it will just fade as a forgotten footnote into history without a second thought, care, or whim. Again, this isn't meant to dunk on the Winnipeg Rail fan or even discredit the video as bad, because it is far from bad and he does bring up a lot of valid points. But this is something I wish that CPKC would change in the future, because the Kansas City Southern was a beautiful railroad. It was magnificent, and this is not just me saying it as a rail fan, this is me saying it as a historian too, and having talked to plenty of former Kansas City Southern employees and those who grew up with the Kansas City Southern, and having researched it extensively, its impact in the area I live in, and how it played a vital cog in other areas where it interchanged or even had an indirect impact on. But of course, that's all forgotten, because all we can focus on is the fact that it's a Canadian railroad company. Now they have the prime service for north-south transcon main line, and that just leaves Kansas City Southern in limbo. And it's depressing.